Well, welcome anyway, and thank you for joining this session. It was supposed to be a double act. I don't know if you saw any information about this session before joining, but it was supposed to be myself and a chap called Rob. Rob was my de facto county chair, and I'll give you a bit of a potted history as to why he's only the de facto county chair. But sadly, he's taken a break from scouting, so you've got me, which is quite prevalent. We're talking about effective executives, and the key person who I feel is the key person to our role. Oh wow, what's going on here? I've got millions of people joining.
They were all in the waiting room, I guess.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'm sorry that you guys are all been sitting in the waiting room. I haven't got access to be able to add you, so obviously someone's done that. We were just going through names of people, but as there's quite a lot of you, we won't do that anymore. Gwyn, I'm surprised to see you in here. Excellent, welcome, Gwyn. You can help me. I was just saying. So the idea of today is talking about effective executive committees, and I was going to do this with a double act with my de facto county chair, and I'll explain a little bit as to why it's a de facto county chair. But sadly, my de facto county chair has now decided to leave scouting for a bit. So quite prevalent that I'm now running the session on effective executive committees, but there we are. So I'll try my best. I feel that you have too much of being taught to, so this is absolutely an interactive session. So, you know, the idea, guys, is to be able to share from one another our experiences and to add any value to it. So please don't wait to be invited to speak. Just jump in at any period of time. For those that have just joined, just to introduce myself, my name's Lee. I'm the County Commissioner of Greater London North East, and I've been the County Commissioner for just about coming up 3 years. And forgive me for those who are in GLNE, but it's been a bit of a roller coaster the last 3 years. Those that are smiling know what we're talking about, particularly and really essentially centered around governance. And Paul Spencer up there just mentioned it's a bit like car insurance. It's fine until it goes wrong. And really where Greater London North East found itself was where it had gone wrong. And it's been a 3-year project so far trying to get it back on track. Previously to that, I was District Commissioner in West London, very similar set of circumstances, again, governance related. So effective executive committees, but I really want to start by saying, what is an executive committee there for? And I'm sure I'm teaching you guys how to suck eggs, but just to remind ourselves, whether that's at group, district or county level, the executive committee there are there to support the group scout leader, the district commissioner or the county commissioner in the effective operation of their role. So basically they are there to ensure that the district, county or group scout leader are able to fulfill their role as best as they possibly can. So there really is an absolute partnership between the group scout leader, district commissioner or county commissioner and the executive committee. And what we see is where groups either haven't got a group scout leader or an effective executive committee, we see and the data shows this, those are the groups that tend to struggle with their operation and with their running. And groups that are very, very successful are groups where there is an effective group scout leader and an effective executive committee. More often than not, we focus on the operational side of scouting and we make sure we've got leaders and we make sure that we've got sections running at the behest of making sure that we've got an effective executive committee. And there's really two splits here. At group level, and we've already heard that from Niels up there, we find that at group level, it's actually lack of people being able to do the role. So many groups end up not having a group chair, like Niels mentioned himself, for a period of time, or an effective executive committee. But at district and county level, we find it the opposite way round, that we've usually got an executive committee of people that perhaps shouldn't be an executive committee or should have given up the role a long time ago, or the chair is the person that perhaps struggles to remind themselves of what the role of the executive committee are. So I don't want to give death by anecdote, but I just want to give you, to start the ball rolling really, the two stories of my experience as a district commissioner and as a county commissioner. Both times I inherited a non-functioning executive committee. So in West London district, we inherited an executive committee that I can only describe as the grandees of the former districts. West London was a merger of 3 or 2.5 former districts: Hammersmith and Fulham, Kensington and Chelsea, and a little bit of the city of Westminster added on. And really, the role of the executive committee for the previous 15 years had been to ensure that the former district's money wasn't spent anywhere than other in their former district. So the Fulham representatives were there to preserve the Fulham money. Dan, this might sound quite familiar to some of the stuff still going on in West London. The Kensington and Chelsea Executive Committee members were there to preserve the money that was historically Kensington and Chelsea. And the district chair was a former district commissioner. Collectively, the executive committee saw their role as managing the district commissioner. And again, we often see this, particularly at district level, that there's a confusion about effective executive committees. The executive committee's role is not there to manage the district commissioner. They are not the line manager. They are not the governing body that censure or approve or otherwise what the district commissioner or the group scout leader or the county commissioner do. They are there to enable that commissioner to be able to fulfill the functions of their role. And so I inherited right at the beginning of my term, shortly after an AGM, an executive committee who were particularly hostile to someone who had no connection with any of the former districts. I had come from Oxford after spending 3 years in Oxford down to West London, and I found myself, because of my work, living in Pimlico. And I got parachuted by Terry, our regional commissioner, to be the district commissioner there. And so there was instantly an element of tension around that. They had lacked any awareness of the governance role of an executive committee. So for many of the groups, there were no executive committees. Many of the groups' accounts had not been audited for many years. There was absolutely no acknowledgement of what was going on with regards to safety or safeguarding. The reason why I mention these is because I'm going to move on to talking about actually making sure you've got the right team of people, because that's the key about effective executive committees. So that was what we inherited in West London District. In Greater London North East, without going into much detail, it's a very similar story. Over probably the last 10 or so years, on the face of it, the county was running very well. It was running lots of great events and they were doing all sorts of activities, but actually the governance of the county was missing. So bank accounts were being set up by the various active support units or various other trustees just to make sure things happen. So there was just to give some example of that, the county secretary set up a bank account to be able to pay the trainers, because it was easier for her to use a single signatory cheque to pay trainers than try to go and get 2 signatories on the county bank account. So what was happening for 10 years was money was being transferred from the county account into this personal account to be able to pay trainers. But that was never recorded or acknowledged anywhere. It was never audited. Who knows what was going on there? Now, I'm absolutely not saying there's any impropriety here. Be very clear, I'm not accusing anybody of that. What was happening is because governance had failed, people were coming up with workarounds and solutions to make their life easier. And on one level, let's commend our active support units and our secretary. They were being quite ingenious with their workarounds. But what it was doing was what we call in business terms failure demand. And some of you will have heard that terminology before. They were putting in processes because the system had failed. Ultimately, where there's a crack, there's usually a deeper chasm below it. And within our county, there was a serious lack of oversight with regards to safety and safeguarding. And those of you that have been on any of the major safety and safeguarding courses will know that the major example scenario that's mentioned in that safeguarding course sadly came from our county. And so I was asked to become the county commissioner at a period of time where the county had gone through some very serious safety and safeguarding incidents, which really was just the tip of the iceberg when it came to governance. I mentioned them two examples because the key to solving them is getting a really, really good team around them. In both circumstances, the chairs have been chairs that had been in the role for quite some time and didn't quite understand that the role of an executive committee had considerably changed. And so neither in the district or in the county were the executive committees aware of their responsibility to be monitoring safety and safeguarding, to be having that conversation with the relevant commissioner to make sure that there was financial and other resource being poured in where it needed to be. And as Paul mentions, where you get one thing wrong in one place, there's usually a litany of other things that are not quite right with that. So the key thing for you guys to take away really is, who is the chair of your relevant committee? If you're a commissioner, is it someone that you can absolutely work with? Because the bottom line to solving all these questions is having someone that you can absolutely work with, someone who you see as a colleague, as opposed to someone who's just fulfilling the role. Particularly, it's different for districts and counties where there's usually a role holder, and a little bit different for group level where often the role is vacant. But essentially, what you're looking for is you need someone that you can work with as a colleague. And in both experiences, both at the district and county level, yes, I'll come on to that, Dan. Both at district county level that I've been a commissioner for, that relationship wasn't there with the existing incumbents. And where that relationship isn't there, you're never going to get things done. So if you are a group scout leader or a district commissioner, or indeed Gwyn as a county commissioner, I really encourage you to have a reflect of, is the person that's doing the role someone that you can work with? Alas, Rob, as I say, who's been the de facto chair for the last couple of years, him and I would be speaking 2, 3, 4 times a week about all sorts of things. And I absolutely saw him as my right-hand man. More so perhaps than my deputy commissioners and my assistant commissioners. Such was the relationship between commissioner and chair. And really, to come on to Dan's question, which is the chair typically appointed by the DC and GSL? Absolutely, because that relationship is so key. It is a nominated post. So just to explain, the group scout leader nominates to the group scout council, the district commissioner nominates to the district scout council, the county commissioner nominates to the county scout council, the chair. It's not then voted upon, it is just literally approved. How you approve can be a show of hands, it can be a round of applause, it can be a deathly silence. It is an approval process, but the commissioner nominates the person that's going to be the chair. The council can't put someone else up to stand for election, and it's not an elected position. Such is the key relationship between commissioner and chair. So it has to be someone that you can trust, someone that you can work with, someone that you can share all the good and gory details. Just going through the question there, feel free to unmute your mics. You don't need to do this. I do encourage you guys to jump in. But Neil says, on a group level, the chair is elected by the AGM. Just to say, it's not elected, it's approved at the AGM. So the group scout leader nominates to the group scout council the person that they want to be the chair, and the group scout council approve that appointment. My process of approving is basically to say, can I have a round of applause? And then that's it. If one person claps, that's approved. There's not a vote yay or nay. That's not a possibility in this process because it is a GSL's appointment. Dan, go for it.
I must say that the very, very first thing that I did when I was made GSL was I appointed a chair that I knew and got along with quite easily. It was a friend that I met on the Icelandic moot, and he lives in Nuremberg in Germany, which isn't really an issue because we're doing everything by Zoom. But it's such a good thing to have a decent sounding board. And I mean, the things that happen in scout groups could be, examples from our group is disputes about badges all the way through to possible safeguarding issues. And I think having someone that you know quite well and you're able to get along with is really fundamental. And I think without that contact, and if I went on with my scout group with the chair that was in situ, I think that we would be a very different group, and I don't think I would be in that role now. So I think that it's a real something that we really need to shout about, that the chair appointment, the appointment of chair is really fundamental for a really positive group.
Absolutely. And just to say, if you haven't got the right chair in place, everything falls apart. I mean, it really, really does. Just to come back to Dave. David says the council can vote against. No, I mean the rules are.
They could, and it's happened. It happened in my district before me, because the council must also approve. So you must have at least 50%, a majority vote of the council, vote to approve the chair. Because if they don't trust the chair either, so as he's quite clear, it must be approved, it must be appointed. So if more than 50% of the council vote against the chair that's been proposed, that's not an accepted chair. So there has to be at least half. And if they don't approve the DC's nomination, they can't nominate someone else. The GSL must nominate someone else for them to approve. But the council must approve with a majority vote. Now, you can say all those in favour say aye, and as long as the chair who was sitting at the time says that that's in favour. But if 50%, more than 50% do not approve, that's not an approved appointment.
I suppose what I would say to you,
it's very unlikely to happen.
Yeah. So what I'd say to you, David, is if you could point me to where in POR it says 50% of the group districts or county scout council need to vote that, then I'll concede the point. I think the rules are clearly opaque where it just says the county or group or district scout council need to approve. What it doesn't actually say is 50% or how that process happens.
But
so you can leave it up to interpretation.
The word approve means that they must vote majority in favour.
Isn't that a moot point? Because if, as you say, David, if the AGM or the overall group doesn't trust the chair, then you have a problem anyway, even if formally it may be all right.
Mm.
Yeah,
well, I mean,
it's a problem.
It is an interesting point. I like to say, I mean, people can interpret this, and it's not for me here to tell you how to run your groups or districts or county accordingly. But I'm very clear that what we shouldn't do is add things to what POR doesn't say. POR doesn't say you need to have 50% a majority. It doesn't say how you need to receive approval. That's an interpretation that's allowed by that. So obviously, David, you're absolutely free to do that in your district if you so wish. My view on it is, and my encouragement to my district commissioners and group scout leaders is an approval can just be by a round of applause or a nod. I never ever take a vote because POR doesn't require there to be a vote for it. Niels is right, there does need to be an element of trust, but that trust must be between the group scout leader or the commissioner and the chair before anybody else, because essentially that person is the person who's there to enable the governance side of things to support the group scout leader. So essentially the group scout leader is the person that relevant executive committee is supporting. And it's worthwhile just reiterating the point here. The basic unit of scouting is the group. It's not a section, it is the group. So you can have a group that doesn't have all the sections, but you can't have a section without a group. So the basic unit of scouting is the group, and the basic role that needs to be filled is the group scout leader in that group. And so therefore the executive committee are there primarily to support, as it says in POR, to support the group scout leader in meeting the requirements of their role. So that's why the relationship, first, most and foremost, has to be about with the group scout leader. And the reason for that is for example, with my situation in Greater London North East, I've brought on someone who's not known by leaders in Greater London North East because he was a West London trustee. I've brought that person onto the executive committee. They won't have a clue who that person is. The County Scout Council won't have a clue who that person was. And so therefore they could take the view, well, we don't know who he is, we don't trust him. Whereas actually at the end of the day, it's about me being able to trust that person because it's my relationship with that person that's got to be effective to be able to make them things go forward.
Yeah. So, can I just ask a question on that, on your view of the approval process? I was just asking, outside of an AGM, so I'm in the situation now where I need to appoint a chair, and we've had our AGM, it'd be in the middle of the year. What would you is if I can find a person who's willing to take that role on, what would you say I need to do as the approval process for the Scout Council?
I'm glad you've just asked that question, because we've spoke to the secretary of the company secretary of the Scouts, because we've got this exact situation. So the current chair of the county hasn't been effective for the last 6 or so months, and which is why Rob has been the de facto chair for a period of time. With Rob stepping away, we've now had to look at what we're going to do to fulfill the role. What they've advised to us is if at the AGM you haven't filled the role of chair, it stays vacant, and then the executive committee with the county commissioner can pass a resolution to appoint an interim chair until such time as an AGM happens.
Yeah, that's the situation here. We've got somebody who is, our group secretary has taken over the chair's role.
Yeah.
While I go and try and find a chair. But then, so if I now find a chair, what would you say on that? We've gone past the AGM. He's now chair, is in that position at the moment.
So your executive committee just pass a resolution to make that person interim chair until the next AGM.
No, till the person is found. So what I'm saying is, if you're in the middle of your year and you haven't got an AGM, would you say you need to call a meeting or? No.
So the company secretary has advised us we don't need to call an AGM. You can call an AGM, but what she's advised us is if you're halfway through your reporting year, you could just casually fill the role as an interim chair until your next AGM would come round, at which point you then make the formal nomination and get the approval. Okay. So that's her advice, because we're in exactly that same situation.
Okay.
They recommend, Lee, that person is co-opted onto the executive, which the executive can do, and then the executive say, will you chair the meeting till the next AGM?
Yeah, spot on, Paul. Exactly that. So that person would be co-opted on, quite right, and then the executive just then pass that resolution to say we're making you effectively the chair until the next AGM. So Paul's spot on there. Yeah. Of course, you can go through the route of having an AGM if you wish. Well, it would be an extraordinary general meeting, but then you'll be calling a load of adults just to say, here's my nomination for chair. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Presumably they can do it as a Zoom meeting, and if only one parent turns up and they say, yeah, you go, yep, everyone who turned up, everyone was invited, the Scouts will have agreed.
As long as they are a member of the relevant Scout Council, so if you're a group, a parent, if you're a district or a county, it needs to be those representatives that make up the Scout Council. As long as there is approval from that, it doesn't say, as I take difference from David, but my interpretation of it is as long as there is people there to approve it, that's it. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that was the advice, and thanks, Paul, just for clarifying that co-opted element.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there any at this point, just to pause, I'm just going to try and catch up with that, but is there any other questions? Could you not hold an EGM to approve the chair? Absolutely, you could do that, Colin. You could do that. The company secretary just felt that was a bit laborious, but you could absolutely do that. That would be a correct way of doing it, and to do that. And as David says, absolutely, they could be co-opted, but you can only do that if you have elected members. You're absolutely right, David. Yes. So you. We've been checking the rules up about this. It's actually a little bit grey. So the executive committees are made up of elected and nominated members, and you can have co-opted. All depending, you might have a different constitution. It all depends on what you have. But if you have the standard constitution, the word is slightly different for all three of these roles. So your elected members, the standard constitution says you can have up to, I think it's 4 or 6 off the top of my head, I can't quite remember them. Your nominated members should not exceed the number of those elected. So if you only have one person elected, you can only have one person that the commissioner nominates. The nominated can only equal the actual number of people that are elected. Your co-opted is slightly different. The wording is slightly different. You can have up to the number of people that could be nominated. So if your constitution says we are having 4 people elected, but you only have 2 people elected, well, you can only then have 2 people nominated, but you can have up to 4 people co-opted, because if your constitution says, as a standard constitution, up to the number of people that could be elected, that's 4. The reason why we were asking this is because we've just been doing this exercise. Exactly, the number of co-opted members must not exceed the number of elected members. You need to check. I need to just double check that, unless you've got it up in front of you, because the standard constitution was slightly okay. Yeah,
I'm going to say it might be different in the county one.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely. So just read what your constitution says, because we've had exactly this, David's conversation and I, we've not had this, but it's exactly the conversation we've been having on the county level is how many people do we need to elect? And does that affect the number of co-opted? But at the county constitution, and your constitutions might be different because you can adopt your own constitution, but the one certainly at county and certainly at districts is they're slightly worded different when it comes to nominated and co-opted for that.
But the thing is, Lee, everybody, whether it be group, district or county, must have a minute somewhere saying how many people they elect each year. And once you've got that set up, you're done.
Absolutely. But by and large, just to come, Stephen, back to your question, there should be no issue for you not to be able to co-opt one person onto your executive committee, because whatever situation you are, you've probably got that covered on now. Are there any questions on the basic sort of relationship of the chair or anything about sort of elections anyone else wants to say? Fab. I'm just trying to keep up there. Yeah, there we go. So that's exactly right, David. Spot on. Thank you. But you see, this is where POR can be your friend, but it can also be a massive pain in the backside, because as David rightly points out, it's slightly different for group as it is for county. But as you've probably seen in the comments, it does there say the number of co-opted members must not exceed the number of members who may be elected. So you could have actually more co-opted people than you've actually got elected. So thank you, David, for picking that one up on that. So let's just go have a quick run over the target about what your executive committees are responsible for. Does anybody want to shout out what they think your exec is responsible for? And there was silence in the room.
How about...
Wait, can you say that again?
What do you think your executive committee is responsible for?
How about all insurance matters?
Absolutely. Insurance is one of the matters that they're responsible for.
Finance.
Safety.
Finance. Recruitment. Safeguarding. Paul, you had one as well, Paul Simons.
Health and safety.
Health and safety. Excellent. Absolutely.
Charity law.
Charity law. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. Absolutely.
Make sure the GSL's behaving themselves.
No, not that one. Everything but
Why
that
not?
one. Because that's the role of the county commissioner or the groups or the district commissioner. The district commissioner or the county commissioner is the GSL or the DC's line manager, not the chair. The chair is not the line manager of that. So yeah, thank you, Dave, but no, unfortunately, not that one. Absolutely. So essentially, what that means is that everything that's not about running a section and ensuring the delivery of a program essentially rests with the executive committee. So making sure that there's enough money to be able to buy equipment, making sure that there's enough adults to be able to run the program, they are things that are matters of the executive committee. Running the program and delivering the program are not matters of the executive committee. They are the
ensuring that it's being delivered safely is
absolutely. And the way that the executive committee ensures it's being made safely is they're responsible for the building risk assessment. If you've got your building, they're also responsible for ensuring that all the adults have got their safety and safeguarding. Now, this is where it's a grey line, because the manager manages the process. So the manager, the group scout leader, is the person that has the conversation with the adult to encourage them and to ensure that they do the training. But the executive committee might want to, and this is where it is a grey line, Dave, they might want to be making sure that the group scout leader or the commissioner has got the relevant information. So, for example, at county level, my county executive, there's a trustee that's responsible for safety and safeguarding, and every month they produce a report, goes to our DCs as well, but they produce a report that shows us real-time data about how many adults and who they are who haven't got safety and safeguarding in place. But the other part of that is they're also responsible for financing that. So it may well be that you've got a half a dozen adults who haven't done their safety and safeguarding. Well, is the financial resources in place to be able to deliver that? So again, at district and county, it might be about coughing up some money to run a training course or making sure that enough adults have got trainers or whatever it is. But at group level, it may well be about making sure that those adults have got the time, the resources, the finances to be able to go on a course. You know, so if there's an admin fee, for example, to do a safeguarding course, not that there is because it's online, it would be the executive's responsibility to ensure that there's finances to be able to ensure that that's not a barrier to adults doing it. Good example is first aid, for example. Some first aid courses cost, and at group level, the group should be ensuring that there's the money there to enable the adults to be able to do the course. Adults in Scouting shouldn't be paying for their own first aid course. It should be coming out of the charity's money because it's what the charity are doing. It's how the charity supports. So you're absolutely right, Niels. It's a multifaceted route for the executive. It's insurance, it's making sure that the health and safety with risk assessments, but it's also making sure that there's time and money allocated to making sure that that's not a barrier to people doing their training that they have to do. And we all know, because you know, us as county commissioners and district commissioners are probably on your back all the time. Safety and safeguarding is the big one that we're all being pushed to ensure to do, and it's something that I encourage all executive committees to have. You know, just a quick show of hands: how many executive committees actually actively discuss their safety and safeguarding and their adults that have got compliance in their group or their district? Fantastic. That's what I like to see. Really, really good. I really encourage every executive committee that's a standing item, so it's continually monitored. What we find, and again, it comes back to good governance, when it's being looked at, it actually means that people's minds are just focused on it. And again, it shows that actually, by and large, groups that do this don't have a problem with non-compliance. Groups that don't have an executive committee that are constantly discussing this, we've got an issue with non-compliance. So that's a real key thing to do. One of the areas that is usually an area that is of controversy is recruitment, particularly when it comes to group executive committees. The group executive is responsible for ensuring that there's adequate number of adults to provide the program. What that basically means is they're responsible for recruitment with the group scout leader. The group scout leader is the person that makes the appointment. They're the manager. They're the person that will agree the role description and put them through the appointments process, and ultimately the district support that in their way. But it's for the executive committee of the group to be putting in place the time and the resources to be able to do that recruitment. So things like buying flyers or banners or having advertising boards in shopping centres or whatever is the responsibility of the executive committee. And it's often an area of the executive committee that is easier overlooked, particularly at group level. It's sometimes not, but sometimes easier at district and county level to find adults and willing volunteers to take on roles, although we're all finding that a struggle at the moment, I know. But at group level, particularly, it's about making sure that finances and time and other resources are allocated to recruitment. More often than not, we see again and again and again operational leaders that are there to deliver a program spending time on recruiting. And the problem is if they're spending time on recruiting, they're not spending as much time as they could on delivering the fantastic quality program. So really, essentially, the executive committee are taking everything away from section leaders to allow them to focus 100% on delivering a fantastic quality program. Now, of course, we understand that that's an ideal world, and actually in reality, there's a grey area, and that recruitment is a joint act. I get that, I know that. But really, it's about the executive committee with the group scout leader, making sure that we've got succession planning in place, making sure that we've got our adults are being incentivized. Are they being encouraged? Again, when I was a group scout leader, we had an air scout troop. Now, aviation activities are quite expensive, but we allocated money from the group funds to be able to enable our adults to be trained in various aviation activities as a reward to them, as a thank you to them, as a way of acknowledging their contribution to scouting. But that also helps with recruitment and retention of adult volunteers. But it's all essentially comes from making sure that adequate finances have been allocated from the group funds to be able to enable that to happen. So succession planning, recruitment, retention, all are things that the executive committee rightly should be having a role in and a conversation with the group scout leader. So ultimately for the group scout leader or the commissioner to manage the adults in scouting, but enable them to have the tools and the resources to be able to do what they need to do. Recruitment's a big area that's often left out. Governance, we'll come on to charity law. David mentioned quite rightly charity law. There are some legal requirements for charities. We are a charity, and often it's the charity law side of things that is left to sort of be fallen apart in groups particularly. And we often get overlooked by the Charity Commission because we're such small groups. But we need to make sure that our finances are clear, that it's open to scrutiny, and that they are properly checked and audited. More often than not, our accounts, and I speak from both the district and the counties that I've been involved in, more often than not, our finances are not clear and it's not transparent. There are requirements under charity law, and David, I don't know if you want to jump in here and say anything about charity law to that context.
I was just saying that it's the same for non-registered groups as it is for registered groups.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
The district that is responsible for as the regulator for non-registered groups. So we have the responsibilities district as if we were the Charity Commission to regulate non-registered groups.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. Yeah, and you're quite right. Often people think that just because we don't have to submit our data to the Charity Commission, we're hidden away from it. And unfortunately, I mean, the bigger piece of work that's going on is that the Charity Commission are saying the biggest contribution of charity data comes from the Scouts, actually, because every group is a charity in its own right. And some of that is not recorded, not reported, because we're accepted charities, because that's how we are. But we are the biggest sort of pool of charities. And there is a question mark that national level are dealing with about actually what's the right governance level about all these little autonomous charities here. But currently that's where we're at the moment. So our requirements under charity law are exactly the same. We are bound by them as even the biggest charities in the country. What that means is really we need to make sure that we have got AGMs happening and that our data and our information is well publicised and is open to scrutiny. So that means making sure that you do have minutes of your meetings. And the number of times that I've gone to executive committees and there hasn't been a minute taker, and so we basically go, oh, there's going to be no minutes today. That's not good governance. That's not good governance at all. I know that means that someone has got to take on the extra work of writing minutes, but that's the reality. We need to have open and transparency for our charity. We're responsible for other people's money. Is that clear? Anyone want to ask any questions on that?
There's actually a question slightly off the topic, but in the talking as charities, because I'm a group that is registered as a charity, so we're registered and we do our normal returns. But the subject has been raised by people who work on our exec with other charities of the issue of charitable incorporated organisations, so providing extra prosperity and actually having a legal identity as under law. I know this is a new concept. I don't know if Scouts are moving that way or if there is any benefits to that, or...
I mean, I'm not cited on exactly what they're talking about. I think there's a push. And again, I don't. The answer is I don't know.
Right,
and
yeah.
I'm gonna add a little bit of my own personal view on this. I think the view that's held by a lot of people is that every group being its own charity and having its own executive committee adds an awful lot of burden onto our adult volunteers to try and recruit executive committees, trying to recruit the number of adults to be able to do that. And whether actually a complete rethink about our structure. I mean, Matt Hyde is quite open to say, if we were creating Scouting now, we wouldn't create it in the same structure. And so I think there is a desire to perhaps have the first level of charity governance, perhaps at district level. And so the charity is the district. Yeah. Now, whether that takes on a legal identity or not, I don't know. But what that would mean is that groups wouldn't have their own group executive committees. But that's in very much early stages. And I'm adding my own personal opinions onto that as opposed to any national policy. So I'm heavily caveating, don't go back and say, Lee said this is happening, because I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that it is being thought about. The Charity Commission are saying, we don't think your governance structures are correct. And we don't particularly like the idea that there's so many small charities that are effectively federated. How much oversight does a district have on your group executives? very little. Certainly as a county, it's very difficult to see that. And so there are some big question marks. What that looks like, it might end up as CIOs. I don't know. I don't know, Stephen, I'll be honest.
Lee, the thing about CIOs, they are mainly set up if a charity wants to trade. It wants to raise money by trading, and that could include letting out premises as well. If you move away from the purpose of the charity, then you have problems with the charity status. Yeah.
But good question. I think watch this space. Certainly in the next sort of 4 or 5 years, there'll be a lot more discussion about effective executive committees, and whether every group needs to have an executive committee, or whether actually are we just struggling, are we spreading ourselves too thin to try and fill all these charity trustee positions across the country, and would a newer and different model look the same? One last thing I wanted to just talk about, and then we'll open it up for sort of 15 minutes worth of discussion, is just about restricted and designated accounts. And this is particularly prevalent for those who have saved or raised money for European Jamboree, because European Jamboree was cancelled this year. It has caused a whole host of headache about how and why we do things. So a restricted account is, for example, if you've gone out with a collection bucket, or you've asked people to specifically raise money for a specific purpose. So coming back to the European Jamboree, our European Jamboree members raised money specifically for the European Jamboree. That money is restricted money because people have given that money for that specific purpose. Or you might say, well, I'm going to give the Scout District £500 for canoes. If that's what you've specifically done, that is a restricted account. And what that means is you can't then spend that money on anything else. And where this has caused a bit of a headache, Quinn's laughing because this has been a headache for most counties. If you raise money for the European Jamboree and that European Jamboree is not going ahead, that is restricted money, which means you can't just move it into your general accounts. You have to give that money back to those people that have given that money. And this has caused a whole load of headache, because if you've been doing bag packing at Sainsbury's, how are you going to actually realistically work out who gave you that 25p for the bucket? And it's a problem. Now, by and large, it's not going to be people knocking on the door, but it does mean that people are entitled to have that money come back. Designated is different. Designated is where the charity designates that money. So that means you can undesignate it. You can decide not to use it on that. So you might have an account in your group that is used for the roof fund. But if people haven't specifically given for that roof, and it's just general funds that you've been putting away, you can move them around as and when you please. What you can't do is unrestrict restricted funds without the consent of the people that gave that money. Why I raise this is because I think there's a serious thing, particularly for you executive members, is to think about how we raise money in the future. I'll disclose, when I'm not scouting, I'm the vicar of a church here in Tottenham. And when we raise money, whether it's by text giving or contactless card or whatever, we put a little caveat that says we will use it however we please. So I've got a fund that's up for redoing our church gardens, but there's a little starred asterisk that says we will use it for this and any other activity with regards to the charity, which is the church. The reason for adding that is it's the get out clause. What it means is that our church garden account is actually a designated fund, not a restricted. So what that means is that if the roof falls down in church, I can move all that money out of the garden fund and repair the roof, because it's only designated by the charity. If it was restricted, I wouldn't be able to do that. I would not be able to transfer the money to repair the roof. And so what I'd encourage trustees to think about is not restricting money where you can. Because particularly with European Jamboree, if you're a group that has raised money for a member to go to European Jamboree, now that Jamboree is not going ahead, you're obliged under charity law to return that money or ask the benefactor whether they're prepared to unrestrict that money. And it completely is a headache for us, particularly at county level and at district level, to try and unpick that, because we haven't always got all the information about it. So I would urge and encourage you guys, particularly as trustees, to think about designating rather than restricting where possible, because if something happens, if you need to shift that money around, you can shift that money around a lot better when it's designated than if you can restricted. So I do encourage you guys, particularly when it comes to jamborees and events like that, that you might have accounts for locally, not to restrict your money. Absolutely, that is spot on. Well, they're restricted. David's just put legacies cause similar problems. Absolutely, and you know, again, to use my church experience, you know, someone will leave, you know, £5 or whatever to the church organ restoration fund, which basically means I can never ever spend that money unless it's to repair my organ, which is going to cost a lot more than £5, I assure you, to repair. So yeah, legacies, again, make sure that you've got that word in, or you're having that conversation with legacies, that they're giving it for general purposes, or that they would that they're happy for it to be designated rather than restricted, because once it's restricted, it can cause a whole host of problems. In fact, that's all I really wanted to talk about with effective executives. Just to recap, the relationship between the chair and yourself is key. And really think about, is this someone that I can work with, that I really see as a partnership, a double act with me in the team to do that? That's the first thing. Second one is be fully aware of the responsibilities of the executive committee. It's not just the obvious ones, but it's some of the less obvious ones. Make sure you're complying with charity law, even if you're not required to report to the Charity Commission. And finally, just have a think about your finances and how they are governed, how they are they're managed. I'm going to throw it open now for a general chat or questions for the next 5-10 minutes. Otherwise, go and get yourself an early lunch and a cup of coffee. And thank you for listening to us. But over to you guys.
Can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
How would you energise an exec committee? I've got a lovely chair. He's very nice. He's just very laissez-faire and not the most dynamic of individuals. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I was asking him about purchasing some PPE, purchasing some other things. It came just when we went into the next lockdown. So not quite the level of engagement that I'm looking for from my exec. Are there any tips that you might give for how to engage your exec and sort of speed them up a bit?
So I'll give some of my opinion, and then I'll leave it for other guys to say. Again, it's about the relationship that you have with the chair. The chair manages the executive committee and really is the person that drives the executive committee, making sure that they've got action points and that people are allocated tasks to do that. So what I would say is really build that relationship with your chair. And that may well be, like I say, with my chairs, you regularly talking to them, and we set the agenda jointly and work out what we're trying to achieve in every meeting, so that can be steered through by the chair. So my first question is he might be a nice guy. Is he the right chair? Is he the type of person that's going to be able to take this forward, or actually is another role on the executive more for him? And if it is the former, that he is the right person to be the chair, build that relationship so that he's actually driving that executive for you and getting the desired results, because he's their line manager effectively. So that's my two penny worth on it. Chaps and chapesses, anything for any advice?
You're absolutely right, Lee. If the person is not doing the job, you've seriously got to consider it. And the chairman hasn't got to be the person that does everything. There's other members. And in many ways, don't be frightened of subcommittees. Having a group of people doing a job, but the thing is that for the executive to have the confidence in that subcommittee, and when they give a report, that the executive don't then go and discuss it all over again. Delegation has got to be done properly, but if it is done properly, it can save a lot of time.
Paul, while you're on there's been a question that's come through from James saying, anyone have experiences of subcommittees at district level? What has worked best way? Did you want to just unpack that a little bit more, Paul?
Yes, there's a lot of tasks that can be done. If you've got any buildings that the district is responsible for, have a building subcommittee, let them sort out all the problems and let them come to you with their recommendations. You don't expect everybody from the appointments committee to come to the district executive. You delegate that work to the appointments committee so you can delegate it again to the property committee. You can delegate it to the finance committee, who can look at things and come up with suggestions. This is the whole idea of subcommittees, that they come up with suggestions. And it may be that you can find people to work on those committees who don't want to accept the role of a trustee, because a trustee is a very onerous role now. And we've got people who in the past have said, oh, I only joined the executive to help with the fundraising. They didn't want the responsibility of the trustee. So the framework is there. And as you rightly say, Lee, and other people have found, that if you've got the right subcommittees and the right chairs of those subcommittees, and those chairs are part of the executive and accepted by the executive, you save an awful lot of time and you stop going round and round in circles.
And David's just added a link, a fantastic link, actually. Thank you, David, for that. Just to see what they've got down in Willesden district. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And absolutely, Lisa. Lisa's just rightly pointed out here, make sure they've got specific purpose. And in fact, Hornchurch district have got that. Did you want to say anything more, Lisa? Don't feel you have to.
No, I mean, they meet literally a couple of times a year just to make sure that they are still following what we need to with regards to HMRC, HR, making sure that we're sticking within the limits for salaries, etc. That we're not whether we need to pay NI. And then Paul, who manages Tracy, then writes a lengthy report into us. If there's any actions he needs from us, he'll put them in there. We're having issues with emails at the moment, which is affecting her work. So that's something that we've got someone now working on moving our emails across. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Lisa. Sam, one last thing before someone else had a question. It's just to say, Sam, don't try and take a whole chunk of the pie in one go. You know, lots of things in scouting take a long time to try and change. And so my advice would be just start on one small thing and get the executive working right on that, rather than the whole mountain of tasks of getting everything right. Just take it bite by bite. That's certainly been our experience both in West London and in the county. It's just to focus on one thing and getting that right at a time. So my last bit of advice really would be, just focus with your chair on that one thing that you want to get right, and just work from there, and nothing happens overnight. So, yeah.
One of the things we're trying to do, I'm a GSL in this particular capacity, and we don't have our own building, so we haven't got the responsibility of looking after a building, but we are quite a large group. One of the things I'm trying to do is encourage all the members of the executive, including the leaders who've opted to be on the executive as well, is to do the online training, because I think that helps to give them a bit of an insight into what their role is. We used to be appallingly bad at training our trustees. That there was some training, but very few people went. But getting them to do the online training, even though it's only an hour's worth, starts to give them a bit of an insight. We're just going through another development plan within our group, not because the plans are particularly useful, but because the whole process of planning is valuable. So that's ways in which I'm trying to motivate our small exec to make a difference.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes back to that small little tasks that have got a beginning and an end can really bring some success and some confidence to executive committees. You can't really underestimate that. So I think everything's there's some low hanging fruit that you can really do that can bring some success to the exec. Really go for it. Definitely. No, thank you, Chris. Any other questions? I'm mindful we've only got a minute, but fab. Well, we're around all afternoon, so if you have got any other questions, do speak to us. And the structure's there. If you're a group level, your district commissioner or your county commissioner, we're there to help you guys. And don't be scared to ask questions. There'll be people out there that can give advice and help you with these things. So don't feel that you're having to do this by yourself. Do speak to those that are there. Your chairs, district chairs, county chairs, district commissioner, county commissioner. Use them. That's what we're here for. We want to help you guys. So don't feel you've got to do this by yourself. Fab. Right, go and have some lunch then, and we'll see you later on.